The kids were the first to see him coming up the road. His limp was legendary, recognizable from the stories their parents had told them since they could listen. He dragged his dead foot while pulling himself forward with his metal staff. They watched as the fuzzy-eared creature pulled the cart behind him. He paused, smiling, unashamed of the missing teeth in his mouth. He reached his shaking hand out, struggling to pat the nearest child. "Hello, hello, young ones." "You're him!" the smallest shouted at the top of her lungs. "You're here!" One of the elder boys looked around, pausing to look over his shoulder. "I'll get them. I'll get my dad." The Tomato Man stumbled and grabbed hold of his shoulder. "You're Clifford's son, aren't you?" The boy paused before standing straighter and gave a forceful nod. "Yes, he's my dad." The man smiled wider, his breath stale, tinged with hints of old food. "You were just a babe in your mom's arms last I saw you. She was ill after your birth. Did she make it?" The boy smiled, nodding. "I've got 3 sisters since you came. They're all well." The Tomato Man laughed deeply. The cloak nearly fell off his back if not for the large hump. "That is good to hear, young man. Very good to hear. Strong blood here. Strong blood." He raised his shaking hand up and pointed toward the houses. "Go, get Clifford. He and I have much to discuss." The boy ran towards the buildings, shouting, "The Tomato Man! The Tomato Man is here!" Clifford hurried down the road, several other adults right behind him. He stopped a few feet short, smiling at the scene. The old man was letting the kids dig red jelly out of a jar, feasting, slime smeared all over their faces. "Damn, Tom. I was worried we wouldn't see you again. It's been ages." The Tomato Man stood up, handing the jar off to the littlest girl. "Clifford, my old friend, I hear you've sired 3 more." Clifford raised his hands out and looped them over the bony man, his hands finding hold on the hump of his back. "The road took you somewhere new, didn't it?" Tom hugged him back, squeezing with a strength his frame shouldn't have. "I told you it might, and you're right, it did." Clifford let him go, and then motioned toward the town. Come. Susan started some roast as soon as we heard Simon yelling, 'You're here.'" He laughed. "When was the last time you had a home-cooked meal?" The Tomato Man paused and looked at the cart and mule. "You kids mind leading her in?" Clifford looked them over and nodded. The kids cleaned the jelly onto their clothes and went over to the creature, taking it by the lead. It followed them easily, leaving ample slack in the line. He took Tom's shaking hand and led him up the road as well. Tom squeezed his hand and chuckled. "It's not as long as you think." Clifford looked at him, pausing slightly mid-step. "There's others? You found others?" The Tomato Man smiled, tilting his head toward the cart. "There is, and we've done some trading." Clifford's eyes grew wide. This is huge. This is—" he paused. "They're safe? As in they are no threat? Are they a threat? Tell me what, how do we—" Tom raised his left hand for a moment, shushing him down. "They are of the sea, far, far from here. They will be no threat to you, but the possibility of trade is profound." Clifford looked around at the other adults. Their smiles met his. This is the best news. We never thought to hear such. We thought we were the only ones." The Tomato Man stepped through the gate, pausing to touch the old wood mast holding it up. "I was worried too." He looked over the post and let his fingers fumble over the identification tag stapled to its side. His thumb found the numbers signifying its geographical location. "It's been a long time." Tom nearly fell into the seat next to the fire. He recovered and got comfortable quickly. 3 women sat across from him with Clifford in the center. Susan walked in, swaying as she did, and bent over to hand the Tomato Man a cup of warm fluid. "Finest tea we've ever grown. Enjoy, sir." He smiled as he took the cup. He leaned over and smelled it. "Damn, it near smells like I remember. This is fine." Cliff leaned in. "Tell us, Tom. Tell us about them." Susan glared at him. "Tom, take your time. We're in no hurry here. Rest." She looked over at her mate. "The man's been on the road. Give him some peace." Clifford leaned back and looked around. The small girl ran up to Tom's side and started crawling into his lap. "The story! The story!" Clifford chuckled and looked over at Susan. Susan walked over to the oven and spoke loudly for everyone in the house to hear. The tomato man deserves some peace. The poor man's been through hell to get here. Let him have a moment. The girl got situated on his bony knee and stared at him, huffing. You owe me a story. Tom couldn't help but laugh. He laughed and laughed, his hand finding her back to keep her from falling off as he bellowed. He reached up and wiped a tear from his eye before looking down at her. Her face was asymmetrical. Her right eye was higher up, allowing her nose to sponsor a third nostril just under it. He smiled at her. What is your name, little one? Ginsey. Tom nodded. You are right. You are absolutely right, Ginsey. He looked around at the dozen children scooting in closer on the tile floor. He raised his head and noted the eyes of the other men of houses standing at the door. I owe the children the story. I have neglected my duty, and it must be attended to. Several of the children hollered in excitement. Ginsey patted her hands together. Tom shifted, keeping the tea stable on his knee. Children, did your parents not tell you the story? Clifford's son raised his bent arm up. Tom nodded to him. They told us you are best to tell it. Best memory was there. No liberties taken. Tom nodded. So long as I can, I will tell it. He looked over at Clifford. I will tell it same as I told it to Clifford when he was young, as I told it to his father, his mother, his grandparents, and all those generations that came before. He looked around at the children. This story I tell you is my story, and the story of my people. He raised up his hand, the cup shaking the tea inside. He paused and took a breath. Your people rule this valley. All that grows here grows because you have willed it to survive. Every weak stem you prop up, every twisted leaf you unwind, every creature that crawls here, you people have nurtured from their mother's wombs. He took another pause, looking down at Ginsey. Not my people. My people ruled the entire world. He waved the tea out across in front of them. And the world gave us food, plants, animals, fresh air, all of it, easily and in abundance. Tom looked down for a moment, remembering. There were things, strawberries. I loved them so much. It was a red fruit, delicious. Grew on the ground. He laughed. Slugs would eat them. I had to put copper out on the garden beds, copper or salt lines. The little buggers shriveled up right proper with salt. Ginsey recoiled slightly. Slugs? You killed them? The tomato man nodded. Yes, my people were ruthless, little one. You don't know slugs, you have things similar, though. Those green things that crawl on your roofs, with the eye stalks. Ginsey's face contorted in disgust. You killed slimies? Tom chuckled and leaned close to her before looking out at the other kids. My people killed everything, the kids gasped. Everything that could be eaten, all that was delicious, it was ours. No animal could touch it. No useless plant could grow where we wanted our crops. Everything was for us, and that is how it had always been. Ginsey tried to crawl off of him, but Tom held her firm. You wanted the story, girl. This is the story of you and me. Now listen. She looked over at Susan. Mom! Mom! Susan looked up from the counter, smiling back at her. Listen to your story. Ginsey fought a bit more before starting to tremble. She then leaned over and bit into the cloak covering his arm. Tom laughed as she gnawed on him. He leaned forward and handed the cup of tea to Clifford before reaching over and petting her thin, straw-like hair. I deserve every bit of that. She looked up at him, slowly releasing her grip. You're a mean one, aren't you? He nodded. We were the worst. He sighed. The seas were full of beasts. Life so abundant you couldn't count the species. We found new things every time a ship set to looking. Our people ate upon it all. We ate so much one of our biggest problems was being so fat from eating too much. Susan shook her head in the kitchen. Tom continued. As happens, though, as things that eat well, breed well. You see it here, tending to each new thing, feeding it in hopes to get more. He paused. We did not need nurtured as all here in your valley does. Life was not work for us. We felt not the strain. We lounged, we played. We had no idea of how precious the life all around us was, and so our numbers grew. He reached back over and took the tea back. sipping on it. Damn, Susan, that's really good. He looked at Clifford. Is it a strong plant? Clifford nodded. It doesn't flower, but we got cuttings to take. We used your idea about the soil fibers. We got them growing strong in the manure and moved them around it. The tomato man smiled and looked back at Ginzy. We didn't just kill animals and plants, little one. My people killed each other. We killed each other all the time. Her eyes grew wide. We had since before we had stories. We killed because it was in our blood. We fought over land, over food, over mates, over words. One of the boys laughed. They fought over words. Tom nodded. Killed over them, but that's not the worst. He gave pause for effect. We made up imaginings. We created objects, worthless things, and collected them. We fought for them, killed each other for them. Whoever had the most of them was deemed better than all others. Respect was given. The best things were given, all for these objects. Ginzy laughed. Why? The tomato man looked down at her. Because we were selfish. We thought with only our stomach, our genitals, and only for ourselves. We wanted more, more, more. He raised the tea up and took the last sip. He looked out at them, out at the men in the doorway. Then, as was like to happen, those who had the most decided that they wanted more. Tom looked out toward the window, out past the struggling green grove, and out to the barren dust of the hills. We had weapons, things that worked with the power of the very sun itself. The wealthiest hid in their holes and had their minions set them loose upon the world. He sighed again. You see, they thought they were the smartest, the best, just because they had all the wealth in the world. They figured they needed more, the world itself. The men, Bezos, Musk, and the other billionaires, they ruled from their holes and set the fire upon the world, thinking it would be a cleansing. He looked out at the children. They wanted to return to an idea, a garden world, a world without people. They wanted the world fresh for them and their people. He looked back at the misshapen girl on his knee. They did not only release the fire of the sun upon us, though. He took a long breath. They let loose a disease amongst us. They had trained it upon mosquitoes. Mosquitoes? Ginzy asked. They were an insect, small thing like you grow in you cups, but with far less legs. It would fly and bite people, taking a dot of blood to birth its children. They made a plague to kill them? The tomato man nodded. They were deemed a pest, worthy of not existing anymore. They made a disease called CRISPR and let it loose, making all the mosquito boys make only boys in the next generation. Ginzy's eyes widened again. The plague? Tom nodded. They let it loose in the world, thinking when they left their holes we would all be but males feuding amongst ourselves, a lost race, near death. The elder boy raised his hand again. Tom nodded to him again. When are they coming back to the world, the wealthy ones? They're not, never will. They are long gone. The tomato man continued. Their hubris was their demise. Some of those that survived the fire knew about the disease they had done. The cities that remained noticed when entire classes were boys and rules were made. A family of all males were cut. They realized the doom in themselves and ended their gene line, or the mayors had men end their gene lines. Those families that still bore females were treated as the new royalty. Women bearing lines were the first to feel the strain as you do. They must reproduce, they must live, they must have children, or we all die. They had to bear fruit. Ginzy looked over at her mom. They're all gone, though, aren't they? They're not us, are they? The tomato man nodded. You are right. They were still my people, cleaner, unbroken, but still shaped like me. Ginzy raised her hand up and touched his face, both sides near matching the other. You're so pretty. They were prettier? He laughed. Oh, little one, thank you. I have not been pretty in a long, long time. You, though, you are the pretty one. The fuzz on her face shivered slightly. I'm not pretty. Clifford laughed. You are beautiful, my child. Tom laughed with Clifford. All of you are beautiful, each and every one of you. You are alive, lovers of the world, the most beautiful to ever have breathed the air. He paused again and made eye contact with each of the kids. But, back to the women lines. The plague was still there in the men, in the people, But that plague was not made within people. It was made by science, in labs, by mixing, by matching. It was made with a purpose, but my people did not realize the only purpose of life is to live. He looked around. That plague, being mixed from numerous things, learned to jump. He popped his knee, shaking the girl. Ginzy laughed. He looked at her. The plague jumped. She nodded. It jumped into everything. The tomato man nodded back at her, straightening up. He moved his cloak, revealing his back. Green leaves poked out of the hump he had been covering. Ginzy looked around him, noting the red circles. The tomatoes! Tom smiled at her. Come, children, take them off me, share them. The kids rushed up and began plucking the small tomatoes off the vines crawling over his back. They each popped one into their mouths before running over to their families to share them. Ginzy ran back to him and let him help her back onto his knee. Tom covered his hump back up and looked around as the kids settled back down. Mind where you squat the next few days. Those seeds love going through digestive tracts. Ginzy laughed. We know, Mr. Tom. We love our tomatoes. He chuckled at her. Well, the plague, it jumped. It jumped from people to birds to people to plants to bats to bugs to trees to dogs to cats to spiders to ants to everything. He raised his hands out. The world was infected. Spider legs grew on trees. Leaves grew. He paused, pointing to himself. On backs. Fish eyes grew in hearts. Hearts grew in ears. Lumps of liver grow in lungs. Fungus sprouted everywhere and anywhere. The world was full of life, but it was all mixed up and wrong. Dying. The tomato man sat still for a moment. I woke up in my garden. These leaves sprouting through me. I didn't. I thought it was a curse then. I thought it was the most horrible thing that could ever happen. He sat for another moment. That was before I realized I was all but alone. He looked over at the men like creatures in the door. Lifetimes are encoded in us all, and with the death of the world, my limit died as well. I was written over by a lobster or a redwood something. I kept going. I still keep going. It took me a couple years to realize how much I missed the green. It was after a long winter of canned food that I found the first leaf, the first one not growing on myself. He smiled down at Ginzy. I found patches of twisted woods, things that grew but didn't go to seed, single life forms, struggling to hold on. I tended them, grew them as best I could. Some things I found could reproduce. I found slime in puddles and things slurping on them. I found things crawling on so many legs the rolled. I found life like I had never seen it before, and all of it was one death away from not existing anymore. The boy raised his hand again. And then? You found us? The tomato man smiled. Yes, I found the first of your people. He sighed. I do not know who or what she was. I cannot say if she was born my people or born something else. She was alive, though, and to me she was the most amazing thing I had seen in years. He looked around at them. Your Eve, she could not talk. She had intelligent eyes, though, eyes like a cat. She had been living on anything she could catch with her mangled arms. She, like me, was an accumulation of bits from the world. One of those bits made her not just the first of your people, but the virgin mother of your people. Whether it was lizard DNA, fish, plant, I don't know, but something in her allowed her to continuously bear children. He looked at Ginzy again. She was simple, though, unable to understand what was happening. She lacked the means to care for the things, and quite often ate them back up to regain the nutrients. The kids shivered at that. Tom took a moment. But I took care of her from then on. I fed her children, raised them. I taught the first of your people. They were smarter, could speak, and with time those people became all of you. Ginzy's eyes were wide again. You've always been with us? Tom nodded. I have. The boy got up and walked over, extending out his hand. The tomato man took it, shaking it slightly. I thank you, good sir, for looking over my people. As I come of age, I will do my best to alleviate your burden, raise the crop stronger than the years before, and help the animals prosper. Tom smiled at him and let him go. He turned and walked over to his dad, who took him in his arms. Clifford rubbed his head. You did good, son. I'm proud of you. The tomato man let Ginsey down and patted her on the back. Susan motioned to the table. Supper's ready. Tom stretched and stood up. Smells great. He looked around as the neighbor kids started out the door. Clifford, your house? Giving thanks? Clifford nodded and took his spot at the head of the table.